The fun is back, oh yes siree. It's the 2600 from Atari. It's the video system with classics galore. From Space Invaders to cars that roar. A real hip joystick controls the screen. Solaris is hot and Midnight Magic's mean. And one more thing, it's got a special low price. Under 50 bucks. 50 bucks? Now isn't that nice? The fun is back, oh yes siree. It's the 2600 from Atari.
So today we'll look at some movie tie-ins released for the Atari 2600. This is the Philly Flasher game, which will not be appearing in the list, but it looks funny anyway. First three games in this list have names from films, but are not games based on the films. Bachelor Party. The game is a simplified version of Breakout, where the ball is made to look like a nude man and the bricks are made to look like nude women, and the ball bounces back and forth horizontally rather than vertically. On the left, he is repelled by a woman with whom he collides and subsequently eliminates from play, or by the opposing wall. On the right, a paddle, said to be a container of aphrodisiac Spanish fly in the manual, returns the depleted player to the room full of women. The paddle is controlled by the player using the paddle controller. China Syndrome. In China Syndrome for the Atari 2600, you are tasked with averting a nuclear disaster on Spectra Island. Following an earthquake, the island's reactor has been compromised, leaking radioactive particles. Your mission is to control a robotic arm and secure these particles before the radiation escalates to a critical meltdown. The game is divided into three color sections, red at the top, blue in the middle, and yellow at the bottom. Each section initially contains one radioactive particle. You must navigate the robotic arm to catch these particles by pressing the fire button precisely when they align with the arm. Superman. Superman is a video game programmed by John Dunn and released in 1979 by Atari Inc. The player controls Superman, whose quest is to explore an open-ended environment to find three pieces of a bridge that was destroyed by Lex Luthor, capture Luthor and his criminal gang, and return to the Daily Planet. The game world is populated by antagonists such as helicopters that rearranges the bridge pieces and roving kryptonite satellites that cause Superman to revert to Clark Kent. Alien. Alien is a 1982 maze video game for the Atari 2600, published by Fox Video Games. The game has a player control a human moving through the hallways of a spaceship, avoiding the adult alien and destroying the small alien eggs. Dune. Based off the 1984 movie, Dune was to be an action-adventure game along the same lines as the classic 2600 game Adventure. Dune was originally started by veteran programmers Bruce Pullman and Gary Stark before they began working on the 5200 game, The Last Starfighter, which also went unreleased. Unfortunately, Gary and Bruce had only gone through the brainstorming process when the work was stopped. However, it appears that another programmer may have been assigned to pick up and continue work on Dune. Only preliminary coding has been started before Jack Tramiel shut down the game development and fired most of the staff. The Entity. Based on the horror movie of the same name, The Entity is an action game by programmer Mark Klein, who was also responsible for two other unreleased 20th Century Fox games, Pickup and Look Ahead. Much like the previous game, Pickup, The Entity deals with a rather adult theme. This could be the reason why 20th Century Fox chose not to release the game. E.T. the Extraterrestrial. E.T. the Extraterrestrial is a 1982 adventure game developed and published by Atari, Inc. for the Atari 2600, based on the film of the same name. The game's objective is to guide the eponymous character through various screens to collect 3 pieces of an interplanetary telephone, which allow him to contact his home planet. Ghostbusters! Based on the 1984 film of the same name, the Ghostbusters are the ones to call to bust any ghost hauntings. They do this through the use of nuclear-accelerated proton packs and ghost traps, whereby the ghost can be captured and transferred to a secure storage facility at the headquarters. However, New York City has suddenly become a very haunted place, and the number of ghosts has suddenly and dramatically increased. The Ghostbusters must reduce the paranormal psychokinetic energy and the PK level in the city, which represents ghost power, before the Temple of Zul awakens and resurrects the evil goddess called Gozer. Ghostbusters 2. Ghostbusters 2 was the title of a video game released for the Atari 2600. It is a conversion of the Activision computer ports. However, it only has 2 levels. It had been in development in 1989, but it was shelved as the Atari 2600 was on its last leg. British game company Salu ended up releasing the game in Europe under their name in 1992, despite the fact that Atari had already ended support for the system. Gremlins. Gremlins is a 1984 video game developed and published by Atari Inc. It is a tie-in to the 1984 film Gremlins. The 2600 game consists of 2 playable screens and can be played by 1 player or 2 players alternating turns. The first screen is similar to the 1981 game Kaboom. The player controls protagonist Billy Peltzer, who runs side to side across the screen, catching falling mogwai to prevent them from eating hamburgers. In the second screen, similar to Space Invaders, the player moves Billy back and forth across the screen and shoots waves of descending gremlins. Halloween. Halloween is a horror game for the Atari 2600, released in October 1983 by Wizard Video. It is based on the 1978 horror film of the same name. The game was programmed by Tim Martin. When Games by Apollo went broke, Martin and another former employee, Robert Barber, developed Halloween. Although the game was called Halloween and featured the film's theatrical poster as its cover art, as well as the movie's main music theme, the game itself never refers to any characters, including the killer, by the names in the film. James Bond 007. James Bond 007 is a horizontally scrolling shooter published in 1984 by Parker Brothers. It was the first video game based on a James Bond to be given a worldwide release. The player controls James Bond across 4 levels. The player is given a multi-purpose vehicle, acts as an automobile, a plane, and a submarine. The vehicle can fire shots and flare bombs and travels from left to right as player progresses through each level. The player can shoot or avoid enemies and obstacles that appear throughout the game, including boats, frogmen, helicopters, missiles, and mini-submarines. King Kong. King Kong is a platform game programmed by Carl T. Ollinger for the Atari 2600 and published by Tiger Vision in 1982. Based on the licensed King Kong character, the game is a clone of the first Donkey Kong. It was Tiger Vision's first cartridge. The objective is to rescue the girl by climbing the ladders on top of the screen while jumping over holes and autonomous bombs. Magic bombs are worth 5 times the points of regular bombs when jumped over. As in Donkey Kong, each level has a bonus that counts down. If it reaches 0, a life is lost. Krull. Krull is an Atari 2600 video game based on the 1983 science fantasy film Krull and published in 1983 by Atari Inc. It was written by Dave Storgus, who later ported Millipede to the 2600. Guttleby manufactured an arcade shooter of the same name in the same year, but it is unrelated to the Atari 2600 cartridge other than the CROT license. The game generally follows the plot of the movie and takes place on 4 separate screens. The first level begins with a player as Colwyn at his wedding to Lissa, which is interrupted by the extraterrestrial Slayers. The game continues to generate new Slayers for the player to fight until he is overwhelmed, as Lissa is abducted to the Black Fortress. MASH. MASH is an action game based on the film, written for the Atari 2600 and published by Fox Video Games in 1983. Players are tasked with controlling a helicopter and army doctors at varying points, with the Mobile Army Surgical Hospital team rescuing wounded to take back to the MASH 4077. Planet of the Apes. Planet of the Apes, later released as Revenge of the Apes, is a video game originally developed in 1983 by 20th Century Fox for the Atari 2600. Planned as the Planet of the Apes franchise first video game, it was still in the prototype phase when Fox shuttered its gaming division during the video game crash of 1983. It went unreleased and was assumed lost until 2002, when collectors identified a mislabeled cartridge as the missing Planet of the Apes game. Porkies. Porkies is a video game released for the Atari 2600 in 1983 by 20th Century Fox. It is based on the 1981 film Porky's. The player controls the film's character Pee-wee as he attempts to blow up Porky's bar. In order to do this, Pee-wee must collect a series of objects that are hidden inside the shower room. Raiders of the Lost Ark. Raiders of the Lost Ark is an action-adventure game for the Atari 2600 released in 1982, based on the 1981 film of the same name. The game was designed by Howard Scott Warshaw. The player controls Indiana Jones as he searches for the Lost Ark of the Covenant. The game requires the player to use 2 different controllers. Controller 2 moves Jones, and its button uses an item. Controller 1 selects the item to use, and its button drops the item. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Two completely different prototype versions exist. One was made in 1983 and one made in 1982. One has to wonder why Atari decided to abandon the 1982 version of the game. It is unknown if programmer Greg Easter had anything to do with the 1983 version, but due to the similarities between the two, it is highly likely. Snow White was ultimately cancelled due to managerial indecision. The marketing managers couldn't make up their mind what kind of game they wanted. Programmer Greg Easter decided to shelve the game until management made a decision and went to work on another Atari 2600 game called Mark of the Mole, which also went unreleased. However, Atari began to collapse and Easter left the company before Snow White could be finished. Star Trek Strategic Operations Simulator. Star Trek Strategic Operations Simulator is a space combat simulation arcade game based on the original Star Trek television program and movie series, and is released by Sega in 1982. Star Trek uses color vector graphics for both 2D and 3D first-person perspective. The player controls the Starship Enterprise and must defend sectors from invading Klingon ships. The game makes uses of synthesized speech. Star Wars, the arcade game. Star Wars is a first-person rail shooter game designed by Mike Halley and released as an arcade video game in 1983 by Atari. It uses 3D color vector graphics to simulate the assault on the Death Star from the 1977 film. There are 3 connected gameplay sequences: combat against TIE fighters in space, flying across the surface of the Death Star, and the final trench run. The sequence repeats with the added complications and the Death Star regenerating for each. The player's X-Wing fighter has a shield which only protects against damage a certain number of times, then the next hit ends the game. Speech synthesis emulates actors from the film. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a video game for the Atari 2600 based on the slasher film of the same name, written by Toby Hooper and Kim Henkel. The game was released in March 1983 by Wizard Video Games. A video game sprite representing Leatherface, facing a sprite representing a possible victim. Below Leatherface is a sprite of a bush. To the left of the screen is a sprite of a cow skull. The background is lined with 4 trees and a distant house and car sprites. The player, Leatherface, is approaching a victim. Tron Deadly Discs. Tron Deadly Discs is a video game from the Intellivision console published by Mattel in 1982. The initial game design was done by Don Daglow, and the third design and programmed by Steven Sense. It is the first of 3 Intellivision games based on the Disney motion picture Tron. In Tron Deadly Discs, the player takes the role of Tron, fighting successive waves of enemy disc throwers and recognizers, in a never-ending quest to achieve the highest score.